Palestinians, you're protesting against war crimes for justice during the Syrian aggression that's been going on for the past few months. Have you protested that at all?
I haven't. I wasn't really into it.
Yeah, I have protested against the mercenaries organized by Britain, by United States.
So has the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty done anything to combat the aggression that's been happening in Syria?
No, but it's a lot more complicated than it's being presented in the news.
And there you have it. Some of the people out protesting in Toronto last week about Israel, but they don't want to protest Syria. Syria killing thousands of its own civilians. That doesn't result in protests, but several protests over the last week aimed at Israel. Why? Well, it all comes down to the Jews, doesn't it, really? They don't like them, is my guess. There is a bias in the media against Israel as well, and that shows up in several reports. Take a look at some of these headlines that have been popping up over the last few days. They tell the story of Israelis killing other people. Israelis kill 11 in Gaza. Israeli rocket fire presses on Gaza as rocket fire subsides. They tell you one side of the story. They don't tell you about the 1,000 rockets that land down. They don't tell you about the Israeli woman, the pregnant woman killed in her apartment, Mira Scarf, killed in her apartment as she and her husband were getting ready to start the day. Indiscriminate rocket fire from Gaza kills not only Israelis, but also Palestinians. Here's a report from the CBC on the situation in Gaza.
We have just managed to contact another reporter who is in Gaza City. That city and the area around it have been targets of Israeli airstrikes.
That there could be a ground invasion imminent, and that would only exacerbate the suffering of the people here, and it would certainly make it a lot worse for what they've had to endure over the past 48 hours. So there was hope that perhaps a visit by the Egyptian Prime Minister that took place earlier today was going to bring a lull in the violence. But during that period, there was an Israeli airstrike on a house that killed a Palestinian child, and
I'm not bashing the CBC on this. Lots of media reported on this. We'll bash CBC later in the program. But the report referring to the child, well, here's the problem with it. The Israeli military did not conduct any strikes in the area around the house that was blasted at that time. And based on the damage, the evidence shows the child was killed not by an Israeli strike, but a misfired Hamas rocket. They're still determined to turn the child into a martyr. In the Western media, they're only too happy to bite onto it. Michael Coren, host of The Arena, joins us now. And Michael, this plays out time and again whenever there's trouble involving Israel in the Middle East, doesn't it?
It does, and as you're so loath to attack the CBC right now, I'll do it for you. I was in Edmonton the weekend, otherwise I wouldn't have been watching CBC. I was in a hotel room, and on, was it Saturday morning, there was this rather ambivalent, curious creature doing an interview, I'm talking about the CBC host, with Gideon Levy from Haaretz, the nation, the land. He's the most left-wing journalist in Israel, and he was being interviewed by this fool, totally out of his depth, about what do Israelis feel, how do they feel. This is like asking the most notoriously left-wing, non-representative Canadian journalist, what do Canadians feel? If Israelis did that, we would be outraged, but they were doing it on the CBC.
But, you know, it wasn't just CBC. The reason I said not just CBC is that all the media were doing it. I was driving back from Florida, and we're sitting eating breakfast early Saturday morning, and the reports on CNN were absolutely horrific. At one point, the host said, well, the Israelis say that Hamas has fired hundreds of rockets into Israel over the last year. Do you believe that? That was her question to a Hamas leader who said, oh, no, it hasn't happened. They fired more than 1,000 rockets. And you know, this is documented, and the CNN host saying, do you believe that?
Look, Brent, I've covered 2 wars in Israel now, and because it's such a small country, you'd be back in a hotel most evenings and you'd watch the news coverage and you'd sit there and you'd think it was a George Orwell or a Kafka novel. It was so untrue. Now, I have to say, you'd watch Fox News, and that's a very pro-Israel coverage, but generally it was much more authentic. This is what happened. It happens time and time again. Western journalists will go to the country. In Israel, they can see anything they want. There's barely any control over them at all. When they go into, whether it's Lebanon or Gaza or even the West Bank, they're very controlled. There's only certain things they're allowed access to. They're loved bombed. They're bribed. Their hotel, I know this for a fact. They would stay at the Colony Hotel in Jerusalem. At the end of it, they will be told, no, the bill is paid for you, but here's a receipt anyway to hand to your employers. There are so many levels of corruption that go on, and they simply don't understand the situation, and they side with whom they think are the underdog. Now,
which is kind of a Marxist thing, isn't it? It's about power. We think the Israelis have more power, so let's go with the people.
Well, it is, but don't flatter them too much. Maybe it's Groucho Marx. They're not even at that standard. They're just fools. They're very naive. They come out of journalism school. They're incredulous at what they're seeing. You saw Anderson Cooper reacting to, look, when missiles land, it's frightening, but you don't hear the ones that get you because of the difference between the speed of sound and so on. You tend to be frightened at first. That was probably half a mile away, and he acts as though no one's ever heard a missile. Look, Israelis in Sderot, I haven't been there in a couple of years now, but they're in shelters day and night, over and over again, because missiles are landing, and they're not firecrackers, they kill people. They know what they sound like. It took years of shelling before Israel retaliated. And finally, you have to do something about it.
Yeah, and I want to show, because the headlines talk about this person killed, that person killed, in attacks that are targeted to try and take out offensive positions of Hamas, to try and take out Hamas terrorists who hide among the people. Those headlines generate lots of attention in the Canadian media, in the American media, in the international media. In Europe, it's awful. But I want to show, I believe we've got the picture of Mira Scarf's funeral. This is a woman who was pregnant. She was at home with her husband and child, and they were getting ready to start the day when a missile came in, a rocket fired by Hamas, and took out their apartment. The husband wakes up amidst the rubble, wondering why he can't hear his wife and children. Mm-hmm. This is her funeral. This woman received next to no attention in the media in Canada or the United States. Instead, they just talk about Israel retaliating, and they might mention that she's there, but they don't talk about her. They don't publish photos of her. They talk about what Israel does to the Palestinians.
Brian, there's just been yet another rendering of that absurd play about Rachel Corrie at the University of Toronto. She was a neurotic, troubled American who went out to be a Palestinian Lawrence of Arabia, and she died. I'm sorry and all that, but she wouldn't get out of the way of a bulldozer. In the same period of time, 3 Israeli women by the name of Rachel were murdered by suicide bombers. No one even bothers to remember them, let alone write a bloody play about them. When children die, it's always an obscenity. But Hamas, and we know they do it, they will admit it, when they do place their missile launchers in the middle of schools and hospitals, do you expect the Israelis to say, OK, keep firing because there are families around? They sacrifice, I'm sorry, this has to be said, but on the Palestinian side, and throughout the Arab world, they will sacrifice their young to the god of blood and jihadism. Well, I'm sorry, the Jews are not going to tolerate another Holocaust. If you don't like that, then get used to the violence.
Well, and unfortunately, another front opened in the war. Cyber attacks going on, trying to take down the Israeli government through online. And that's not being launched by Hamas. That's being launched by their useful idiots in the West. Michael, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for dropping by today.
Of course.
All right. Send your thoughts, share your thoughts at liliespad.ca. We've got some stories posted on this. Things you need to know, things you need to read about. liliespad.ca. More to come.